My name is Jim Vanderwall with the Fraser Basin Council, and along with my colleague Cherry Tam, we're pleased to host this webinar today on identifying barriers to community action, learning from the urban wildland urban interface disasters in the past. This is part of our BC Regional Adaptation Collaborative program, where we try to support local governments, First Nations, and the private sector around thinking about how to incorporate future climate into their plans and decisions, and help to plan for future climate. You can go to our website at retooling.ca to access information and resources on climate adaptation. If you aren't already on our email list, feel free to join there. And there's also, so there's a place where you can do that. It shows on the screen there. There's also recordings of our past webinars, including ones on this series. And you can find that there as well. So this particular webinar is part of a series that was planned in coordination with the Ministry of Forest, Lands and Natural Resource Operations and Rural Development, as well as the Association of BC Forest Professionals, and NRCan and the Ministry of Environment and Climate Change Strategy. So we're pleased to have all the support here, and have been focusing over the last couple of months around current programs and activities and strategies for managing wildfire in communities. I just wanted to flag the next webinar in this series, which is on May 16th at the same time as today. Susan Pritchard from the University of Washington is going to be talking about lessons from large wildfire events and the effectiveness of fuel treatments in mitigating wildfire severity. So you can go to our website there to register as well. Also wanted to just make people aware of the upcoming National Conference on Adaptation, Adaptation Canada 2020, which is being held February 19th to 21st in Vancouver. The theme is Raising Our Game on Resilience, and right now there is a call for abstracts which is open till the 21st of May, so feel free to check that out as well. And you can sign up for email updates if you're interested. So just a couple of logistical items for today. Some of you may have participated in our past webinars, but we do keep the audio muted for the participants just because we have so many people, and we want you to be able to hear our speakers. We do encourage discussion and questions, but you'll be able to do that using the question box feature in your control panel. If you have any technical difficulties, feel free to use the email fraserbasin@gmail.com or send a message through the control panel, and Cherry or I will do our best to help you. So today's speaker, we're pleased to have Alan Westhaver, who's with ForestWise Environmental Consulting. His involvement in solving the Wildland Urban Interface fire problems dates back to 1991, when Alan conceived and managed the FireSmart ForestWise project around Jasper, which reduced wildfire risks and restored ecological conditions. And he's also conducted studies into home losses and reconstruction after wildland urban interface fires. And he helps neighborhoods take charge of wildfire risk mitigations by working as a consultant to municipalities. So welcome, Alan. We're just going to pass the controls over to him. And that looks great, Alan. We can see your screen.
Great. Well, thank you very much for the kind introduction, Jim, and welcome to all our participants. I want to thank the Fraser Basin Council and Flinrod, our co-sponsors, for this excellent series linking wildfire issues and climate change, very critical issue, and for challenging me with this kind of double-barreled topic that we've got today when focused on barriers to community action, and at the same time, what can we learn from disasters of the past? Those are very closely linked in my mind, it's all part of the process of problem solving. There's already been some excellent presentations in this series. I think back to Bruce Blackwell and the folks from Whistler providing the operational view from a kind of a practitioner's point of view, and then Kelly Johnston and Amanda from FireSmart Canada or BC provided the overview from the point of view of programming and underlying concepts. And I think you'll see that we're all on the same page here, that there's lots of common threads, and I'm attempting to build on those throughout my presentation. As Jim outlined, my background, I've been involved in the Wildland Urban Interface for nearly 30 years. The formative years of Partners in Protection, the birth of the FireSmart program itself, and more recently the evolution of the FireSmart Community Recognition Program, the opportunity to conduct some investigations in Fort McMurray, Kelowna, and Slave Lake for ICLR, and now I really am focused providing support to fire departments and regional districts as we get into more and more into the implementation stage of the Wildland Urban Interface. So I think that combination of first of all, my training, my experiences as a practitioner, a fire responder, and particularly a lot of involvement over the years I've had with people working hand in hand with people in residents of the Wildland Urban Interface has really shaped my perspective. And I think the cap on all of that was spending 10 days in Fort McMurray, treading kind of lightly through and around the ashes of neighborhoods that have been destroyed, and the ruins of many people's lives are really locked into me. Kind of the viewpoint that the Wildland Urban Interface issue is a combination of things. Two in particular, there's the fire and physics aspect, and it's welded completely to the social aspects, the people aspects, the side of this problem. Those are two very different but very equally important and just inseparable aspects of this problem in my mind, and that leads to the belief that we need to tackle both of these simultaneously. A lot of our emphasis over the years has been on the fire side of things because that is our job, but less emphasis, but fortunately a growing emphasis has been on the people side. I want to point to kind of the little Venn diagram at the bottom right. This is not a problem where we can find some kind of a happy or sweet spot where these things overlap and things will be okay. They are inseparable, and that's a perspective I think that is most helpful. So I don't want to just focus on barriers. That's not the point of today's presentation from my point of view. I really want to talk and think about the positive things that we have, the strengths, the opportunities that are out there. I want to be talking about the tools that we have and the resources and the people that are already working on this problem. There's a lot of bright spots, particularly in British Columbia. We're fortunate here to have a lot of push behind these kinds of programs. But I also want to, talk with you and explore how can we use those resources most effectively, and at the end of the day, how can we expand the influence of risk mitigation to solving this problem? So I think it's worthwhile to begin with a bit of a sit-rep, an overview, and some background information. 25 years ago, this whole issue was a problem that was on the horizon. It's something that was happening in the States, in California, and lo and behold, well, now we are California. And, basically, here's what we know. There's three major influences that are pushing driving this problem, and they're all pushing in the same direction. We need to be conscious of that. I think we are getting more conscious of that, but this is a message that we need to get out to politicians, administrators, and the general public at every opportunity that the climate is warming. The level of fire activity is going up. There's an increasing amount of development and exposure to people, to problems and issues, and at the same time, partly linked with climate change, we've got forest health issues and a lot of fuel is building up out there. And all of that leads to a rising threat. This is a pretty dynamic situation, and it's going to continue to increase. So it's a good time to be asking ourselves kind of a very Canadian question. So how is it going with this wildland urban interface problem? And I think it's useful here to take a bit of a historical perspective. On the screen, the left-hand picture here, you're seeing Fernie, British Columbia as it looked at the end of the day on August 1st in 1908, a small fire that had been kind of pooping around in the woods for quite some time. The wind came up and destroyed virtually the entire city, leaving only about 30 structures standing. Fernie at those days was about the same size as it is today. If we flash forward 108 years to Fort McMurray, we see a very similar situation and a fairly similar outcome. And what strikes me is that, despite all the advantages, all the things that have changed, all the developments and advances in technology and forecasting, and particularly in the field of fire response, that we're seeing similar outcomes, and that's troubling. That's not a good sign. Another kind of concept here that I think is very important and was used very effectively by the people who organized the BC Flood and Wildfire Review was to remind us all about the 4 pillars of emergency management. And I see some analogies between those 4 pillars, which are listed here, and the image on the left here, the ancient columns. There's the planning pillar, just being ready, a response pillar, limiting the effects of that event. There's the long process of recovery. And on the far right, there's the prevention, combination of prevention, disaster prevention, and mitigation. And mitigation is what the focus of Fire Smart is all about. It's the focus of my presentation. And in lots of ways, I think we could consider it kind of being the little brother of the weak sister, and something that's in the past gotten a lot less attention than it deserves. I think another perspective here is that if we just keep doing the same thing over and over, there's no reason for us to expect a better result. And in this case, we really are in need of fundamental changes. Those changes are already underway. If we're going to significantly reduce wildfire losses. And we just retired fire commander that I met from Cal Fire throughout the quote, we just can't adding zeros to response and recovery costs. We have to get ahead of this problem, and risk mitigation is the way to do that. And I guess the last point here in the big picture is that it's always critical to have a goal for what we're trying to achieve here in the Wildland Urban Interface. And Dr. Cavillan from the Conference Board of Canada, I think, came up with one of the best goals that I've seen for us, and that's to create communities that bounce back more quickly following a disastrous wildfire situation. But the real question is why and how do they bounce back faster? And the answer to that is that they suffer fewer losses. It's easier, there's less to recover from, and that is the basis for what we call resilience. So here's the case. in my mind at least, for mitigation. And really, mitigation is just another expression of that age-old saying about an ounce of prevention being worth a pound of cure. How does it work? First of all, when wildfire risk mitigations are in place, the extent and the abundance of hazards are greatly reduced. They're treated in advance, and that leads to lowered fire behavior in terms of intensity and its ability to spread. And in turn, that leads to easier containment of the fire. Firefighters are more effective doing their job and fewer indirect ignitions of structures. And in turn, that leads to increased effectiveness and fewer secondary home ignitions. So at the end of the day, the risk and the losses are both lowered, and that provides community with that ability to bounce back quicker. So that's kind of the mechanics of how it works. So on to barriers and our discussion of what's getting into our way here, what's slowing us down. And I want to mention that I reached out to a whole bunch of our colleagues and asked them that question. And so we've already undertook a bit of a poll, and I've got good response. And here's a list of those. And thanks to Dan Sandink and a study, Dan's with the Institute for Catastrophic Loss Reduction, a little known paper that should be more widespread known, pointed out the idea that there are categories of barriers, and I've used those. The three main categories are social, attitudes, strategic, structural, and resourcing. So here's a list, and it's interesting to see that the social and kind of attitudinal barriers is perhaps one of the longest lists, and very important, because what we're trying to do here is change the behavior of residents and our vulnerability, and they're in control of a lot of those factors. But you can see there's a lot of things that get in the way of them taking action, ranging from inaccurate information and myths that they hold, to denying that an event like this could happen to them. A lot of people feel hopeless, that it's beyond their ability. There is a real lack of specific awareness of what the hazards are around their property and what the specific mitigations could be. We speak lots of times in pretty broad generalities, and that's not helpful. Lots of people don't believe that mitigations don't work, or that the mitigations aren't designed for their particular situation. There's lots of things that get into the way, in particular, where we fail to recognize the intrinsic values that people hold for where they live. The landscape, the vegetation, the wildlife, all the reasons that they live where they live. If we don't address those factors or take them into account, we can lose them pretty quick. On the structural side, there's a lot of things that cases where institutional support, whether it's legislation, planning, or just how we're organized and what we do as agencies, gets in the way. Sometimes it's unclear who's really in charge here and who's taking the lead. And on the other side, the other category is lack of reliable kind of ongoing resources, whether those are financial, people resources, dedicated people. Way too much of the Wildland Urban Interface problem is being run off the corner of the desks of a lot of already very busy people. So those are the categories, and kind of as we go, I'll be talking about some of those. But first off, going back, and starting to think about how can we solve these and what's the solution. By and large, people are starting to warm up to the idea of climate change, but they're not very aware of the implications of that for fire risk and for home losses. And these are points that we need to, make more obvious and clearer to people as we're speaking with them. It is, there's a strong correlation between wildfire losses and the extreme kinds of weather events that are more common just in general as a result of climate change. We're not losing towns and neighborhoods during low and moderate fire danger periods. It's those brief periods of extreme danger, and we need to raise awareness about that. Kind of a second general issue here is that it's very important to frame this issue correctly. Otherwise we're not attacking it at the right point. And how to give kudos. I don't know if Marty's listening today, but Marty Alexander taught generations of wildland fire managers and fire behavior analysts, and was very keen in driving a point that we need to frame the problem correctly first. Kelly Johnson made this point in his presentation that, and I reiterate that, we've been working with a very outdated and oversimplified definition of what the wildland urban interface is. We've been saying for years now, it's where the forest meets homes. And I think that really provides, it's a basis for a lot of myths. It provides an awful lot of people the opportunity to say, well, that's not me. I would wager that most people in Fort McMurray that lost their homes didn't visualize themselves as being in the wildland urban interface. Well, the fact is the wildland urban interface needs to be better defined, and is defined as a set of conditions. It's anywhere where structures are located where they could be ignited by the flames, the radiant heat, or firebrands of a wildland fire. So it's this is a much better operational definition, and it does lead us directly to tackling the right problem. Another thing that's helping us scope or frame the problem correctly is the work of the Canadian Forest Service and Lynn Johnston in particular. For the first time, we can put a number on 60,000, more than 60,000 communities are impacted with this problem. It involves vast amounts of fuel surrounding our areas. So we can scope this problem. And so we also need to get rid of a lot of the misconceptions about how fire spreads and how homes ignite. So what are the key lessons we've learned? Well, over and over again, the outcome on these potential disasters depends on how much risk mitigation was done well before the fire. We've seen this both in positive situations where the losses have been low and situations where the losses is high. Response is not the answer. It's part of the answer, but it's not the only answer. We've got to get going on engaging people. Also, it's not the big flames. The more we study and the more we look, the more research, the more emphasis is put on embers and low creeping flames as being the issue that ignites homes. So it's not an overwhelming problem. How do these disasters develop? Kelly pointed out this sequence, the Wildland Urban Interface disaster sequence, where a fire's conditions for a fire to occur, it ignites, and the crux here is that dozens, if not hundreds of homes ignite, vulnerable homes ignite in a very short span of time, rapidly overwhelming the resources, any amount of resources that could be there. creating situations where it's not safe to put firefighters, and this quickly leads to fire spreading from structure to structure independently of the fuels in the forest, as being the recipe for disaster. And we know that cycle, that sequence can be broken by reducing the vulnerability of homes. If a lot of homes don't ignite, firefighting resources can be more effective, and we can prevent that catastrophic kind of conditions that develop from that. So it brings us to the understanding that we need to tackle the root issue, and that is the vulnerability of homes. They're the high susceptibility to ignition by embers and low creeping flames, and that primarily, comes down to dealing with combustible materials at the home and within 30 meters of it. Simple kind of laws of physics. Fire only spreads when the conditions for combustion are met. So that helps us focus, on what needs to be done. The kinds of measures turn out at the end of the day to be rather inexpensive, mostly simple, not very time consuming, and well within the ability and the responsibility of residents to take action on. And it also tells us that the vast majority of those hazard factors exist within what we call the home ignition zone, and in particular at home and within 3 zones immediately surrounding it within 30 meters. So that brings us to a much more tractable situation, a problem that can be tackled by residents. So we know what to do, where to do it, and who's responsible. And what's our best approach? Well, it's the same. It's always been fire smart, and that hasn't changed. And we need to be working in all of those different disciplines. So the last point here is we have to adopt this perspective that the Wildland Urban Interface and the surroundings, it's not just fuel. This is our tendency, is to look at it from a fire point of view, but it's much, much more than that, particularly to the residents. And those are the people that we need to involve in this problem. And if we're not sensitive to that, if we don't appreciate the values, the aesthetics, the wildlife habitat, those kinds of things, they'll turn us off. We put them at the point of a dilemma. Am I going to be safer, or am I going to live in a place where I enjoy the quality of life? And that's a false choice. It doesn't need to be that way, and we need to be very cautious of that. So this brings me to the point of I want to review some of the lessons, some of the findings from the Fort McMurray study, and I think these make some important contributions to overcoming some of those barriers, from the viewpoint that this study and many others really put the spotlight on what the hazardous conditions were that led to home losses. It raises awareness about the simple things that people can do to protect their homes, and it provides even more evidence that well-known risk mitigations do work even in the boreal forest. So I want to acknowledge the Institute for Catastrophic Loss Reduction. They've been really a long-standing and gold star donor to the Partners in Protection, the Fire Smart program. They are an altruistic organization that really draws upon resources towards finding more effective ways of avoiding losses. And they were the sponsor of this study. I really did focus in this study on the question of why some homes survived and others did not, and focused on locations where the fire transitioned from the forest into the community and how that happened. We're able to look at within that case study, various other, situations, side-by-side comparisons of homes, neighborhoods that have been exposed to extreme heat but didn't suffer damage, and many different situations going on there. But the upshot of it all was that there are significant differences between the homes that survived and those that were destroyed in terms of the hazards, their rating of hazard factors. It really showed that the adoption of fire smart practices was correlated with home survival very strongly. So, and beyond a doubt, it showed us that fire smart guidelines do work. Very high correlation to homes that were rated to be fire smart and survival. And that's kind of a bottom line there. It also showed us once again that a very large percentage of the homes, I suspect they're ignited from embers, that there was adequate barriers and non-fuel areas in lots of places that would have prevented flames and radiant heat being the ignition source. And also very clear that the fire in Fort McMurray and a number of neighborhoods followed that same disaster sequence. So it's operational here, not just in the United States. And a couple other things, it's important that we address all of the hazard factors. There's no single factor that's going to protect a home. All of the hazards need to be addressed, and that there are some kind of Achilles tendons here that can lead to, even though your overall fire smart could lead to ignition of homes. Also pointed to the importance and significance of vegetation, since it contributes a very high percentage, of half to 2/3 of all the hazards in these locations. So, and it also tells us that it's important that we not just deal one home at a time, but protection comes by having clusters of homes. Many homes are impacted by conditions on their neighbor's property in an urban environment. So, and I always point out that there's many limitations, not the least of being a one-person study. There's limitations, but overall, the things that I was finding in Fort McMurray were very similar and overlap very closely with many other studies and are in line with experimental and modeling results achieved elsewhere. So flipping over to the social side of the issue and getting away from the fire, so much it's not that we haven't been doing a lot of communicating over the past 25 years. But by and large, we've not been hugely successful in getting people to adopt these risk mitigations. What we're seeing is that the top-down approach doesn't necessarily change behavior. We've been very innovative, and we can't drop those kind of indirect, passive messaging forms, but they don't engender the type of change in behavior that we're seeking. I think it's pretty clear that just telling people isn't enough. We can't tell them enough times. What we have to do is switch our style of communicating to engage people. And this means reaching out, getting involved with them, providing them with information in different sorts of ways that motivates them so that they understand the problems and they realize and motivated to take responsibility. And once again, the tool for doing that is already in place. The best, most comprehensive tool we have for that is the Fire Smart Canada community recognition program. It's a major initiative of FireSmart Canada. It was released in 2013. It's based on a very well proven American program, the US ForestWise Communities program, and it's really showing its strength. It's been piloted very much in Alberta and BC. Saskatchewan is working hard on this, and other places as well. And there's lots of little nodes showing up across the map of Canada where communities are taking this on. And it's really proving itself that it can bring out the best in the communities. It builds a partnership between the fire agencies and the residents. It effectively brings about a balance of sharing of responsibility, and it really taps into a lot of energy, excitement, creativity, the leadership that exists in our communities, and that's a huge advantage. It's a progressive, for those of you who might not be familiar, it's an 8-step program that begins by making contact and providing information in a different sort of way in the form of a hazard assessment and an evaluation of a community during the early stages. That's facilitated by trained fire personnel trained in this using this program. But the last 5 steps leading up to national recognition by that neighborhood, this is where the community takes the lead, that they provide the leadership, and they plan and conduct events that are taking them towards being more fire resilient. This program has got a very strong foundation, and I want to emphasize a couple of things. It's different in that it's a bottom-up approach. It's grassroots. It's all about engaging people. It's not our usual top-down kind of bombarding people with information. And the second key point here is, aside from providing very explicit information and knowledge, it provides a framework for action, an organizational system that allows people to move ahead on their own with building kind of growing support that evolves in the community. Again, here I want to point out a critical role is played by fire personnel who are trained as what we call local FireSmart representatives. There's a 2-day workshop they take at this point, and this allows them to become kind of the coach. This whole system is built on social marketing principles, whereby scientists have looked at, well, what is it that gets people involved? This program does provide a benefit, a reward. People have to make a commitment, and when they make that commitment, they stick with it. This is a program, a 2-way program. It responds to their resident values. There's a requirement to listen to people and find out what their situation is, and then adapt the FireSmart approach to that community. And it gets people started on some very simple and doable activities. And once that barrier is broken, there's just no stopping people. It really does build trust and confidence and momentum in the communities. What we're finding more recently is that, but practitioners that are working with this, that we're finding really a lot of kind of unexpected benefits in this program. And the big thing here is realizing how adaptable it is to a lot of different situations. True was, I think, designed for more urban situations and neighborhoods, but it's also proving to be very applicable and adaptable to kind of urban, rural, agricultural, cottage styles, even RV resorts. And also not just in forested environments, but grasslands, bush, and all patterns of development. One of the other issues that we face a lot here in British Columbia and other places is that these areas aren't inhabited by full-time residents. It seems that it can work equally well in areas that are dominated by seasonal residents and even at ski hill developments, destination resorts. So it's proving to be a lot more adaptable than I think we expected from the beginning. And how does it do that? Really, it's almost like a pyramid scheme. And I want to draw your attention. I know this is what's evolving in lots of areas around the country, and particularly here in BC. And I want to use the city of Fernie as an example. The city of Fernie, this is already, slide is a little outdated. They've now trained 5. Ted Ryder, fire chief, and his staff, 5 people have been trained as local fire smart representatives, but kind of the work of 3 of those people has led to about 13 neighborhoods right now who have qualified and met the requirements for national certification. When you think upwards of what 3 fire smart representatives have done, building up 13 neighborhoods, that multiplies out to over 650 homes, and well over 1,500 residents are now engaged. They're aware, they're doing things. Their kids, their grandparents, everybody's involved. This is about 20% of the city of Fernie in terms of area and population. And I think Fernie's probably on track to hit 20 by the end of this year, 20 neighborhoods. So that's rapidly growing up, but I think this is a live demonstration of the potential of this program. And this is happening in lots of places in the East Kootenays, the West Kootenays, and throughout the province. So I think this program is the answer. It's the future. It's the best bet that we've got. It's teamed with other things, but this is a great place for us to be focusing a lot of efforts. One of the things that I note, is when we look at the big picture here is, if we look at the different scales, right from the landscape, public lands, down to the neighborhood scale, down to the individual homes scale, this is where we're suffering the big losses. This is where $4 billion of replacement cost was incurred in Fort McMurray alone. It's not to say that we're not suffering losses out here, but at the moment, a lot of our investment in these programs is taking place out here on public lands. Granted, this is probably the easiest place to work, but I think we need to flip these arrows around a little bit, or at least balance them so that our investment is moving more so towards the effective things that can be done in home ignition zones and in neighborhoods. So how do we meet that challenge? This is what I foresee here, and I guess this is what my hope would be, is that we can greatly accelerate that Fire Smart Canada community recognition program into full operational mode, get it operating well and effectively in many different provinces and many different regions of British Columbia. I didn't mention, and I should have, the need to, or the great success that the First Nations emergencies support people have had in applying this program in First Nations communities as well. Another example of how it can be adapted and works well. In my mind, we need to designate and make it part of the duties of municipal and volunteer fire departments that they are the logical facilitator of this program across the province of British Columbia. I think for many reasons, they are the ideal fire smart coaches, the local fire smart representatives, and eventually, this could evolve to the point that we actually have people designated, just like we have fire prevention officers, we have Wildland Urban Interface officers that are leading this program in their area. At the minimum, we need one person working on this program in every fire hall. And as I mentioned, I think structural firefighters have lots of major advantages. They're embedded in virtually every community. They have a strong rapport. They have a history of communicating, of educating, of changing people's behavior, whether it's fire prevention, smoke alarms. They have these skills and they have the contacts and they have the trust of the people as well. I think this is a logical next step for them, for our efforts. So kind of to summarize the webinar, there's no doubt that we face a lot of potential barriers, and some of them are pretty significant, but I don't see any of them that really are insurmountable. And at the same point, there's a lot of good things. A lot of progress is happening right now, and there's lots of opportunities to keep that going. We can build on our strengths. We need to keep shifting that balance of communications to engaging the public, active participation. I think governments really need to keep following through on providing the strategic support, the funding, the person years, and tasking people with those jobs. And it just comes down to now the creativity of using the tools we've got, refining them, and to our best advantage. So that's my advice. Go forth and mitigate. That's the message from here.
Great. Thank you very much, Alan, for your presentation. Lots of great information there, and we already see some questions coming in. But before that, we just have one poll question that we're going to start with. I'll launch that right now, and you can't see this, Alan, but I'll read it out. As you see the wildlife urban interface problem, choose the solution that's most helpful in resolving it. So obviously these are all important, but just give us your opinion around what you feel the most important solutions are.
So while people are getting their answers in there, I hope there wasn't too much racket in the background, Jim. I'm afraid there might have been. We've just moved into a new house and they decided to put scaffolding up outside of my office window during the course of the presentation.
Well, you did very well, all things considered. There's a
They're
little
touching
bit.
up the hardy board siding.
Oh, good. Very fire smart. So our responses here, just sharing them with everybody. So the top response, 63%, the need for finances and dedicated WI staff engaging with residents is the top choice. It's 63%, and followed by at 19% more effective public information, print, social media, electronic, etc. So thanks for sharing that information with us. So we're just going to, at this stage, go to some questions. So first question is, are Fire Smart initiatives, research and funding support moving fast enough to keep pace with climate change, in your opinion?
That is an interesting question. I would say that there's a whole body of information that we have to draw upon. I would say that it's incumbent upon us to keep abreast of what's coming out. It is happening fast. People like Mike Flanagan and others in the climate world are pumping out a lot of information, but it would be helpful. It is helpful, when people do start pulling this information together. I'm not sure if that's happening in a systematic way, but there are sources. I think there's lots more that we can and should learn from investigating disasters, from case studies, and formalizing that process. so that we can continue to learn and adapt, because there's just no question that things are going to keep changing. I'm not sure how much we're going to see in the way of brand new surprises, but certainly, we're going to see the intensity of these effects growing. So, yeah, it's important to support that research and to let people know, if you see issues, to somehow make those known up the ladder. That's part of that institutional support category there, I think.
Great. Okay. Thanks, Alan. Another question here is, since the disaster of Fort McMurray, has the Wood Buffalo Municipal District implemented fire smart bylaws, especially for those neighborhoods being rebuilt?
I can't speak specifically to what's happened, but I am quite certain that they are becoming, they are a hotbed of that kind of activity. And, it seems to me that, there'll be a place that we'll be able to look to as a kind of a strong example. And there are lots of other places where local initiatives are taking place. I can think of examples in Banff and other places where fire chiefs and people are working with planners to make kind of zoning and regulatory changes. So I think it's well worth keeping an eye on the municipality of Wood Buffalo, and hope that they come out with a lot of good information that can benefit others.
Great, thanks. Another question here. Great presentation. Thanks for the info. A question about your 3 contributing factors: climate, increased homes in the wildland urban interface, and forest health. Can you comment on the role of several decades of fire suppression on these factors?
Yes. In fact, I worked for 17 years in Jasper in one of those ecosystems where the impact of fire suppression was, one of those contributing factors. Fire plays in a lot of ecosystems where fire is relatively frequent, and historic fire patterns of fire were frequent, short return intervals. One of the key roles that fire plays for us is that it periodically reduces and removes a lot of fuel. So in doing that, it kind of sustains that pattern that there isn't enough fuel to provide, really intense fires. Where we have in those fire regimes where we've stretched the fire interval, biomass has continued to build up and sets the stage for more intense fires. So grassland areas, aspen parkland areas that are kind of gradually moving to more conifers, Douglas fir, ponderosa pine ecosystems, those are being impacted, and that is a factor in terms of the overall risk situation.
Okay, thank you. Someone else asks, people like to have evergreen landscaping on their property. Do you have some practical examples of attractive fire smart options?
It's hard to give specific examples, but we need to think about, first of all, if you're going to have an evergreen, where is that going to be? There are ways of managing evergreen vegetation that make it less combustible, but certainly evergreen vegetation has got to be well spaced out. The fire smart guidelines are designed to kind of create densities where fire does not spread horizontally from tree to tree. The fire at least drops down to the ground. But isolating those fuels, keeping good clearance away from your home, so if they do ignite, they're not going to spread fire to your home. separating, the fuel on the ground from the fuel in the crown, by pruning and by making sure that there's no fuel sources underneath, isolating, an individual conifer well away so that if it were to ignite, the consequences wouldn't be grave. So there's many things that can be done in combination. But by and large, we are discouraging evergreen vegetation, particularly within 10 meters of homes. Thanks for that question.
Great. Another person says around their home in Invermere, there have been lots of mechanical fuel thinning in the last decade or so, but regeneration of Douglas fir and juniper is now extensive in many of these areas and maintenance is required. When I visit these sites, I can't help but think that prescribed fire would be the most effective approach, but it seems like the use of prescribed fire in BC has decreased in the last few decades. How do we change people's attitudes towards prescribed fire? It's quite a long question here, but yeah, I think you get the point.
Oh, I absolutely do, and it sounds like one of my kindred spirits speaking there. Well, definitely, in getting fire back into the ecosystem is a big part of this, and I think our efforts to raise awareness about the role of fire in ecosystems is part of the Fire Smart program. It's integral to what we're training local Fire Smart representatives to understand and convey to the public. Yes, a couple of points in that question is absolutely maintenance is important. Fuel and vegetation is very dynamic. It's always changing. It's always accumulating. So there has to be a maintenance program. Once again, when residents are involved in working around their homes and in their neighborhoods and on the periphery of those neighborhoods, those maintenance tasks are very straightforward, very simple, and very conducive to kind of organized fire smart events by residents. So it's important. It's a role they can play. If we don't let it get too far ahead of us, it's easily dealt with, especially in those open Doug fir, ponderosa pine ecosystems like around Invermere.
There's a question here. I'm going to try and summarize it a bit. It's quite long, but I think it's basically asking for your perspective around the situation in Jasper. This is someone, Emily Begin from Prince George. You might know her, I'm not sure. Just with the situation with 200,000 hectares of beetle-killed forest, many 5,000 residents in wood structures, lots of visitors, and city advice is to have full tanks of gas to drive somewhere away, some issues around getting out with one of the bridges. Anyway, I'm not gonna, there's quite a lot. I'll pass this on to you directly, but do you have any perspectives on the situation of that community, given your past involvement?
Yeah, I think my perspective on the Jasper community is pretty well the same as what I've presented here, is that we need to be very focused on reducing the ignitability of the homes, of getting residents to share that responsibility by enacting fire smart guidelines on their properties, in their neighborhoods, and pushing those fire smart conditions, beginning at the center of the bullseye, pushing them gradually outwards, so that the home ignition zone, which does extend out 100 meters away from homes, is treated around the entire community of Jasper. Again, we're not protecting ourselves from wildfires. We're protecting ourselves from embers and slow creeping flames that would enter or ignite on properties. So there are going to be, and there always have been, very large wildfires in Jasper and across the coniferous forests of Canada. We're adapting to those, but we're not trying to put out the fires. We're not trying to eliminate fire from ecosystems, and we're certainly not capable of managing fuels intensively across that entire landscape. So multiple approaches, but starting at the core and using fire smart principles is my suggestion there. That's my perspective.
Great, thanks for sharing that. We're just a little bit past 10 o'clock and there are a few more questions. So what I would suggest at the moment is we'll sort of formally close the webinar for those who have other things they need to go on to do. And for those that would like to continue the Q&A for another 10 minutes or so, we can do that. Does that work for you, Alan?
Yep, I'm happy to do that. More than happy. Thank you all for listening and participating.
A question about the program in Fernie is how long did it take to get to the 20% buy-in, and how can we accelerate adoption of this program more broadly?
Yeah, good question. Well, it's interesting history. For the first 2 years of that program, we were operating under the benefit of a UBCM grant of $10,000. That was it. So within that had allowed Fernie to train their first LFR, and for me to provide a little bit of assistance of starting to conduct hazard assessments and community assessment reports. So just this past year, thanks to the Columbia Basin Trust, more funding was available, and now, and I should have mentioned this to everybody, with the advent of the CRR program, the ceiling has changed to $100,000. It's a tenfold increase, which really does facilitate more of those community activities. The bottleneck has always been, communities don't have the funds, even though an event is not expensive. More often than not, they involve something like renting a truck and a chipper and an operator to get rid of those fuels. It's not a big cost, but it is substantial if there's no funding. But now there's good sources for that. So those constraints are being gradually lifted in British Columbia, and I think that's an awesome thing. And it's really energizing those communities and providing, more resources. I think the direction that many fire departments or some are taking is that they foresee hiring somebody full-time or part-time at least, and making this a dedicated part of their duties. And that is my hope. I think this, there's just untold amounts of progress that can be made once this becomes a defined role within local fire departments.
Great, yeah, and there was a question kind of related to that, is how many communities in BC have a dedicated person, a wildlife urban interface person? Do you have a guess?
That's interesting. I'm trying to think of any that have, I'm certain there must be a couple of them anyway, but I couldn't name one at this point. But I do know of several that have an aspiration of going that direction.
Okay. Has there been any thought of having a home recognition program, and would this be an easier starting point than a community recognition program?
I think there's two things. I think in the past there have been many initiatives aimed at individual homes, and partly it's a matter of the math. When we look at now, we know there's 60,000 communities, named communities, that are within the Wildland Urban Interface. That probably equates to several million homes. Several. And our ability, like we were just talking about, the limited resources we have to go kind of door to door, one at a time, that's not a very efficient way if we can be tackling things at the neighborhood scale. If we can be dealing with 20, 50, or 100 homes at once with almost an equivalent amount of effort, that's pretty cost effective and efficient. The other point that comes into play here is that it's very clear that each home is not an island. particularly in the urban situation. You are very heavily influenced by the combustible articles on your neighbor's property, the vegetation on your neighbor's property, and your neighbor's home itself. That could be your source of ignition. So merely dealing with your own property is not really an effective solution. It's a much more holistic and effective solution that clusters of homes become resistant to ignition, and that in fact is something that's proving out this idea that the community itself can be the fire break, that the fire doesn't enter these communities, it has to go around or over them. But if a community has taken these actions, then this is their best bet for protection. And that's two reasons that I really put a lot of faith in a neighborhood scale program.
Okay, great, thanks. A comment from Cindy Pierce as she mentions that the Regional District of Central Kootenay has a dedicated wildfire mitigation staff person.
Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah, I guess good reminder. So yeah, that's Cindy's mentioning that's in the Nelson area. Yep. Okay, yes. Well there's one. Good.
Yeah, District of Mackenzie's hiring one right now, someone says. So it sounds like there's a few that are emerging here, which is great to see.
That is a network, I think, that we're going to learn lots. I mean, their experiences are going to be very valuable, and I hope that that evolves into some kind of a network that can help other communities move ahead with the same kind of thing, or other departments tackle that issue.
Mm-hmm. There's a question from someone on Haida asking about how they can get a local fire smart representative course in their region. There's some costs around travel and funding for them. Do you have any suggestions?
Yeah, that's difficult. The numbers of workshops that have been presented in BC, I think there were 6 this past year, and there's plans for more. But yeah, it involves travel no matter what. I'd be hopeful that those workshops will become more commonplace, and that maybe through one of the CRI grants or something like that, that maybe there can be funding support for people that just have to travel longer distances. I think that is something that might qualify for a portion of those funds if a regional district or a municipality were to submit, but they'd have to check with the managers of that fund. But I think it's one of the qualifying categories.
Okay, great. Thanks very much. One person asks why it's hard to find up-to-date fire smart building information. Or maybe you may have some suggestions on where to find that.
Well, they may be right, and I think to a large extent we're still I guess that's just another area that we need to be working on and building up the availability of that information, and being less reliant on kind of Google searching on some American websites. But I know that FireSmart Canada is really making an effort to enhance the availability of information. But yeah, I think that's a problem that a lot of people are encountering.
Okay. I think we'll do one more question here. I think we're getting pretty close to the end. Hopefully I've covered most, but in the interest of time, how effective is irrigation and keeping a green landscape in reducing the devastating risks of wildfire in the urban interface?
Well, always water is a good thing when it comes to fire, but it's very in lots of places the availability of water is low. We need water for fighting the fire itself. Drawing down water supplies kind of randomly is not a good thing. But also uh, keeping a low, I guess a green lawn is part of a low combustibility landscape around your home. It's good to maintain that. But there's a lot of issues that happen during wildfire situations that make water unavailable. There's a lot of potential for sprinklers and water supplies to fail. So water is, part of the picture, but it's not something that we really want to rely on. We want to increase the resistance of the materials of our homes and the things that are arrayed around our homes, so that if water is available, that's a plus, but we don't rely on that. Um, that's not really the focus of FireSmart. Um,
Okay, great. Thanks very much, Alan, for your presentation and for addressing a lot of questions. Great to see the level of interest in the topic today. So we're going to draw things to a close. The presentation and a recording of it will be on our website in the next week or so. And thank you, Alan, for your participation today, and for everybody for your questions and participation in the webinar. And hope everyone has a great day.
Thank you. Thanks, Jim. Take care,
Okay,
everyone.
bye now.